Welcome to the Private Lenders Podcast with your hosts from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by hardmoneymastermind.com.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Private Lenders Podcast. Chris and Jason here. If you haven't done so already, go check out Lender Software, LENDR software.com. The founder is a lender himself and a member of the Mastermind group, and he's putting together a really, really cool product for portfolio management, loan servicing, all that stuff. Check it out, LENDR software.com. Mention this podcast for a discount on the setup. Okay, today we're talking about some newbie stuff. Specifically, the 6 most common mistakes that we see newbie lenders making. And that, like, we talk to a lot of people who watch this podcast and listen to it, members of the Mastermind group, people we've done consulting with over the years. And these things are pretty across the board. If you're an experienced lender and you hear this list, you're probably going to be like, yeah, I used to do that when I was new. And if you are new, don't feel bad because you're not alone. Everybody else starts making these mistakes, and we're going to help you go right through that learning curve on this show.
Yeah. And then, there's some experienced lenders that are doing this as well. And,
that's fair point.
Cut it out, continue to, as market shifts, as you continue to grow, hopefully you're fortunate enough to get out of some of the, deals that weren't great. And moving forward, just make sure to kind of follow the formula. All right,
let's dive in.
Let's dive in.
All right. So number 1 is trying to do every deal that comes your way. This one's super common. Just because you have a lead from a real estate investor doesn't mean you have to figure out every which way to try to make this deal work. And that is super common when you only have 1 or 2 or 3 leads this week.
It's small pipeline. Small pipeline syndrome. And that happens. You get more leads. You won't have to try to bend every single deal into a way to make something work, right? You're trying to figure out any way to make a deal work because that may be the only deal you're working on today. Goal is get more opportunities, and then you don't have that problem, and you can turn those deals away. And guess what? Even if you do a loan for a good borrower in the past, and they bring you a new deal, and you don't necessarily like it, you don't have to do it, right? Like I think everyone's concerned, like, well, if I don't do it, or it's going to get around that I'm not lending, or I couldn't help them. Just be transparent and honest, right? Something very simple like, hey, listen, this one's just not going to be a great fit for us unless you can put up a little bit more money, a little bit more down payment, or it's not a great fit for us because it's not an area that we want to lend in. So you don't have to do every single deal that comes across your desk. Make sure, these are investments. Treat them like investments. Each one of them is an investment. It's a business individually. Make sure you're only doing strong deals because it'll come and bite you in the ass in the future.
Well, and you said the solution too in there, which is instead of spending all kinds of time trying to make non-deals into deals, take that time and apply it to bringing in more leads. And that will solve the problem of trying to do every deal that comes around. Okay. Number 2, newbie mistake, lending in areas that you don't know, not located in, haven't done business there. I'm not saying you have to be located in the place where you're lending. There are some really successful lenders in the Mastermind group that aren't, but you have to know that area. If you've chosen to lend in a certain market because maybe you own investment real estate there, or you have a bunch of contacts and you take the time to learn that market, those neighborhoods, property types, all the data, values, and everything else that goes into it, that is absolutely fine. But just randomly picking, and again, this probably goes back to number 1 too. People think that like, oh, they gave me a deal, I guess I'm gonna have to do it, even though it's in Chicago and I don't know a thing about Chicago. Is this a good neighborhood? Is this a hood? Like, and just doing it anyway because you think you have to.
Yeah, no doubt. I was just thinking about this. I think it took us 6 years before we lent our first loan in Pennsylvania. And keep in mind, depending on from our office to get to the state of Pennsylvania, it's about an hour to get to one area of Pennsylvania and about 2 hours to get to the other area of Pennsylvania. Not that far away. And it took us 6 years because we not necessarily did we not know the area. We didn't have resources there. We didn't have boots on the ground there. Like it just wasn't an area that we would lend in because there's so many, there were so many moving pieces. We stuck to areas that that we knew. We started in, the DC and Baltimore area, which are two, good sized regions. And the funny thing is a lot of DC area lenders don't lend in Baltimore, and a lot of Baltimore lenders don't lend in DC because they're different, metropolitan areas. And you don't necessarily know them. You don't have resources there. It's a different animal. I mean, can't stress that enough. And what Chris said is very important. You live in an area that you don't want to lend in, or you want to lend in another area, that's no problem. But go all in on that area. Get access to MLS, get access to figuring out ways to value properties, understand local lending laws, meet and network other real estate investors, title companies, lawyers, real estate agents, mortgage brokers, everybody. So you have resources and they can help you, when you need it. Like, I think that goes a long way. Just lend in areas that you know and that you understand.
Okay, number 3 on the most common mistakes: property and deal types that you don't know. So some examples of that. If you've been listening to the podcast for any length of time, you'll know that we're a big fan of lending on small commercial properties. But we didn't start out knowing small commercial, right? We learned it over time years ago and got good at it, and started out with some very conservative deals and learned the underwriting, valuation, how to underwrite income, environmental stuff that pops up. We didn't walk into this business knowing that. Like, we primarily had a residential background, but we learned it, and then we were able to do it. And that can apply to different stuff. I know that a lot of people are getting a little aggressive with ground up construction. I've seen some of the loan quotes from people in the Mastermind group that some of this stuff makes me nervous for people. And that's one of our main jobs in running a Mastermind group for private lenders and doing this podcast, is to try to help people not lose money, right? And then all the other stuff on top of that. So when I see people discussing deals or getting into it, or, I'm a member of a few like Facebook groups of private lenders, stuff like that. And you can just tell when somebody's looking at doing a deal, a second mortgage, it's over here. It's like, I just get worried for people. I get worried for people possibly losing money, just being fast and loose.
Yeah, I remember one of the reasons we started learning, I'm not saying doing, started learning commercial deals is several years into our business, we just wouldn't do commercial deals because we didn't know, we didn't understand it. We wanted to, but we just didn't get it. So we were too chicken to do them. And I remember there was a deal in Baltimore that, in hindsight, was an absolute home run deal, but we didn't know it was a home run deal at the time. And we were talking to, I think, a capital investor like a few weeks later about the deal. He's like, what are you talking about? That deal is a home run. You guys should have lent on that thing. And it's like, well, we didn't know it. We learned it. And over the years, we've been learning different types of asset classes and things like that. And, I'll give you an example. One of our partners, about 6 months ago, brought this like horse farm deal to us, owned it free and clear, needed cash out. And we're like, what do we know about a horse farm, man? Like, I don't know how to underwrite that, value that. Yeah, we could potentially throw out like a pretty low ball number based on, their cost, 30-ish LTV. Let's see if it takes it. But the point is stick to stuff that you understand and you get, right? There's a lender that we know pretty well that has a decent sized operation, and he's an expert at fix and flip stuff. And he does not want to mess with commercial. And he knows a lot of, he knows the area really well. But he's like, I'm not messing with commercial. It's not something I'm willing to do. And there's other lenders that only know commercial, and they don't really want to mess with, the competitiveness of the fix and flip market. That's okay as well. Stick to what you know. And if you don't know it, just ease into it. Start slowly. There's always a number that, I shouldn't say there's always a number that works. There's usually a number that works. And I mean, people laugh at me when I tell them, hey, this property's worth $1 million. Why'd you quote me $100,000? It's like, yeah, that's all I'm comfortable doing in this particular deal.
All right, on to number 4, which could easily be number 1, but these are in no particular order. And that is too high leverage, too high loan to value, loan to cost. This is rampant in the industry. And I feel like some new private lenders who haven't been around the block that much kind of get duped by borrowers into giving high leverage, like 100% financing, 95, stuff like that. And I know, like, look, I talk with people in the Mastermind, and they go to their local meetups and stuff like that, like we recommend, and like we used to do a lot, don't so much anymore. And you're going to chat with rehabbers, and they're like, yeah, I mean, thanks for that 20% down payment, but this guy over here gives me 100% financing. And I know that's happening. We know that's happening. I mean, the institutional guys aren't quite that high, but they're still too high. The reality is it's not worth it to make the money from a hard money loan on a loan that's going to, or an underwriting that's going to eventually lose you money. Like you're going to make $100,000 and lose $100,000. It doesn't make sense to do as we see it. We don't do it ourselves. We don't recommend it. If you're doing 100% financing, it's just a matter of time till you lose money. If you're doing 95 or 90, you're still playing with fire.
Same thing's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, we have X amount of defaults at any given time, and we know what those numbers look like. Granted, things can vary based on whether you're in judicial and non-judicial foreclosure states, stuff like that, but it's still no cakewalk. And this is not a money losing type of business. We're the first mortgage lender. We're supposed to be taking the least amount of risk in the deal. Yeah. And when you change the risk dynamics and take on all the risk away from the borrower who's actually buying the property and put it on yourself when you give leverage too high.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we didn't make up these numbers out of thin air. Like we molded numbers of what we know works and what we know doesn't work if a deal starts defaulting. And, you know, there's folks in the mastermind group who have lost principal on deals because they're way too aggressive, and there's a lot of unknown factors that come in. You know, typically when a deal defaults, it's not like, hey, I'm behind on payments and whatever, you know, I'm going to sell and you'll be all good. Like that happens. But like sometimes, you know, you file foreclosure, then they file bankruptcy, then they countersue you, then, you know, you have to pay their tax bill, then they have this, then they have that. Next thing you know, you're like, crap, like I am screwed. Like, so you got to be careful. 2 quick stories on this as well. Real life stories. I think we foreclosed between all of our offices on 2 properties this past year. And I'll tell you a story. One that, you know, we did a proper loan, one that our numbers were a little bit tight. So one of our offices is we foreclosed on the property. We took ownership. There was a tenant. The property was renovated. The guy couldn't sell it. He put a tenant in there. He was renting it out. We should do a podcast episode on that at some point as well, because that's real risk, right? Because it went from a fully renovated property back to an as-is value property, and it could be worse because this tenant might destroy this damn thing. So anyways, we foreclosed on the property, and we're going through the whole hassle of eviction court to get the tenant out of there so we can secure the property and sell it. Okay, so that was one scenario. I'm going to get back to that in a second. On the other side was a deal that we did locally, and we foreclosed on the property, and coincidentally, there's also tenants in the property. There was 2 tenants in the property that we became aware of after the fact. So the one locally we threw on MLS pretty much as is. We were in a good spot, and we're able to sell it to an investor buyer, you know, who wants to renegotiate with the tenants and make something work, right? The other one that we did, we have to go through eviction court. We've been fighting with, you know, it's not in a great jurisdiction. We have to fight to get this tenant out just so we can get the property back, and then we can assess the damages and be like, okay, we're going to put some more money into this, or we're just going to sell it as is. And I had a conversation with our partner, and I'm like, why don't we just list this thing on MLS as is and get a tenant and get an investor buyer to buy it as is? And he was like, we didn't have enough room in the deal. So that was the difference. The one that we had locally, there was enough room in the deal that we could discount, you know, the price when we took it back at auction in order to sell ASAP. The other one we're going to be scraping out of, and it's tight, that we have to do all the heavy lifting. And I don't know about you, but you didn't become a lender to go to eviction court.
Right.
to take over, you know, a distressed real estate investor's problem. That wasn't the goal, but that could happen. And it's way easier if you have plenty of equity of that thing, because then it'll either sell at auction sale, you know, if it gets that for, or you take it back and you just put it on MLS. So just something to think about.
Okay, moving on to the next one. This is going to be an interesting one. It's probably one that a lot of lenders don't really think about. Number 5 is taking any capital investor without going through an underwriting process and a get to know you process and a relationship sort of thing. Because understandably, I know why people would think, you know, as long as they have the money, then they qualify to invest with me. Because when you're raising capital and you need it and you have deals in the pipeline, I get it. Believe me, we've been there. But at the same time, you learn from experience that not every investor is a good investor for you. You know, some people, I've seen this personally and with other people, I've seen investors take kind of an adversarial approach to the lender, to the lending company. Like if something defaults, it's your fault. And like, you can't have that. Like you can't have a situation where you're trying to collect on a defaulted deal and you're worried the capital investor is going to sue you, right? That's one reason. Also, there's some shady people out there. You know, there are people who have come our way, especially back when many years ago when we were actively raising capital, offering capital. They didn't totally seem on the up and up, or I'm going to refer you to somebody, or I'm going to bring in this, you know, deep-pocketed investor for you. And it if it doesn't smell right, you got to have the discipline to pass on those investors. I would also throw, I'm sure you're gonna have a few comments here, but I would also throw another one in being, they need to be sophisticated enough to understand what we're doing here, right? They need to know what they're investing in. They don't have to be experts. They don't have to be underwriters. They don't have to be like us, but they do have to understand what it is they're investing in, how this works, the fact that there's a potential to lose money. You could be missing monthly payments that we collect later. All that kind of stuff's important.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could count on one hand kind of some troubling capital investors that we worked with over the years. And I think as quick as we wanted their capital, in essence, it was like, here's your capital back. You know, we're not really interested in doing this anymore because it's a headache and you don't want to turn it into that. And I can also say that I know of 3-ish other lenders in different markets that have big operations and they have the wrong capital. And it's been very challenging for them. It's been challenging for them. There's a lot of different one-off agreements. There's not much consistency. It's kind of set up as it shouldn't feel like a lender-borrower relationship. It should feel like a co-lender.
That's right.
It should feel like a partnership. And yeah, it feel like a partnership, and it doesn't feel like a partnership, and you don't feel like it's a partnership, and they don't feel like it's a partnership. It's not going to work, right? Like you're not borrowing money from them, right? So it's one of those things that, you know, I always felt that it was easier to raise capital to get into these deals than it was for fix and flips, because in fix and flips, you're the borrower, they're the lender. In this case, you're the co-lender. So you want to make sure it's a good win-win and you do your due diligence. I'm not saying like give them a dispersonality type, even though it'd be great if you didn't, if you could, but like learn about the capital investor and, you know, underwrite them as well, especially in the front end.
One other comment I want to throw on the capital investor stuff is I know that it's very easy at the beginning to, your capital investors have a bit too much control over you and your operation because you need their money and they know what they're doing. They're sharks. They're good at business. That's why they got rich to begin with. And I know one or two, at least, investors in the mastermind group that are in this position. And you only have a few lenders, and that gives them too much leverage over your operation. They can beat you up over price and pay me a point and like pick and choose their deals because they know you need the money. And the way out of that is to raise more money. If you have somebody who's like, oh yeah, I want 11% and 1 point for any loan I'm going to fund for you, and then you raise another $5 or $8 million, they're not going to be saying that anymore. They're going to be, they want to be in your deals, and they will be back at 10% with everyone else where they should be. They won't have that leverage on you. All you got to do is raise some more. We've been through that exact same experience. So, okay, that's it for the investor stuff. And then we have one more. Number 6 is not having an attorney do title review and possibly doc prep. I know that we prefer to have our attorney do both of these in one process. Does not take long. Fees paid by the borrower on the settlement statement. We absolutely prefer that. I know that some people do prefer to do their own loan documents, which we think can be a little risky. Different states, different language, multiple borrowers and guarantors, all the stuff that can, they can shift around. I know that some people are working through some proper software like lender software that can easily produce documents, not only term sheets and stuff, but also actual loan docs, mortgage, everything else. And so I understand that some people just want to keep doing that themselves. But if you do that, at least get an attorney to do the title review, to negotiate the title policy on your behalf with the title company. The title company doesn't work for you, right? They work for the title insurance company. They want to issue you a policy that's as most in the favor of the title insurer and the least in your favor as they can. That's literally their job. Okay. And so what your attorney does is negotiates that policy as much in the lender's favor and your favor as they can. That's the relationship. That's the negotiation. And a lot of people are unaware of that dynamic.
Whenever someone in the group asks, hey, like they have a default happening, like what are the next steps? Typically the first question is who did your docs, who reviewed your title? And usually the answer is nobody reviewed my title and the title company did my docs, or I did the docs, or I did something like that. And it's like, okay, well, let's go through them and see if, they're going to hold up. Because keep in mind, an attorney that does your loan docs typically has had contested foreclosures against those doc sets, so they know what to do. Like our doc sets are changing regularly. And title review, like, dude, we've done over 4,000 deals. I can't review our own title. I know what to look for on some of these things, but it's so jurisdictional all the time, and things are always there. And it's a negotiation. Every time it's a negotiation with the title company. As we were recording this podcast, I have an email from a title company that clearly states questions related to, let me see if I can get to my underwriter and, get this endorsement for you. Let me see if I can get this endorsement. I don't know if I can do 100% title insurance. Can we still close with 100%, or will you accept 110%? It's a negotiation across the board, and you need someone to do that, that understands it. I don't know what those endorsements are. Yes, I could chat GPT every single one of them each time, but I still don't know. I need an attorney's opinion on if it makes sense or it doesn't make sense on that. So again, as we go through these, listen, these are just mistakes that we've seen. These are mistakes that we've probably made early on.
Sure.
Take them for what they are. If you want to continue to operate the way you're operating and you're comfortable with it, by all means do it. I'm just, we're kind of just giving some advice of what we've seen and what we've personally been involved in over the years. And, hopefully that'll prevent you from making any mistakes.
All right, everyone, that is a pod for today. We appreciate you checking out the show. If you haven't done so already, please come join us inside hardmoneymastermind.com. We'll see you here next time on the podcast.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not intended for legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced private and hard money lenders.